podcast. My name is Mark Steigner. I'm the conductor and artistic director emeritus for CGOA, and with me are the founders of Opera Sicilia, Taylor and Tanis Gonzaga. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here today. So, opera company, founding an opera company. Why and how did that come about?
Do you want to start with this question? Because it's kind of loaded. I'll go after you.
There's a lot going on. I think the main reason we wanted to build an opera company, and to be completely honest, it's a little bit more of a Taylor project. I'm here more of as a support.
You're an invaluable support, though. Like, you do things that I can't do, so it's
yes.
more equal than he leads on. But anyway,
it's more of a Taylor does the creative aspect, and I do more of the background work. So I'm not necessarily the face, but definitely it is a team effort.
Yeah,
and I think you'll be able to speak more as to why particularly you wanted to build an opera company.
So the main thing that happened with me is I was a really young soprano in the industry. I had done a couple young artist programs. I was doing the whole like typical path thing. And there was something about it that I think it's a very, still very legitimate path for most other singers to take. And it's mostly what singers do. But I wanted a little bit more creative control over my projects, which was something that I kind of felt like I didn't get as much of as I wanted to whenever I was just hired as a singer with a company, even though I love doing that work too for different reasons. And I wanted to also create something that was a little bit more kind and provided some like lucrative opportunities for emerging artists, like people at the young artists or grassroots level. And it kind of has branched off into something as well that allows the accessibility of opera in communities that don't get a lot of exposure to it. So places like, well, it could be like the Gorge that doesn't have a resident opera company right now, or it could be just some small town in the middle of Washington State or something like that, where you're a good couple hours away from the next major city. And so your accessibility is not as vast as if you were living in a place like New York. And so it was really meaningful to me to be able to be a part of spreading opera and also creating opportunities for myself that felt more in line with my artistry, and paid opportunities right out the bat for young artists. And even though we hope to be able to substantially increase what we're able to pay right now, we're really proud of the fact that we're able to pay artists right away. That was something that I was like, I'm not going to start the company until I can do that, because there's a lot of emerging artists that
they end up paying out of pocket for
a lot.
Yeah. Right. They're paying for their own career that way.
Less of a career and more of a like, I have to fund this with a correlating career. And we wanted to be a part of kind of a new face where we were like, we're going to give those emerging artists that legitimacy and that validation of their hard work right away.
Nice. It's interesting because we had at least besides Tanis, we've had at least 3 students that have graduated from the high school that went on to have operatic careers. Olivia Newcomb is one of them. Luke McMillan, I don't know if you know who Luke is, right? He studied in New York, and then he went to Europe, and so it's interesting. We've had quite a few opera people come through the high school program.
Yeah. Well, we had a very strong music program, I think.
We did indeed. Yeah. Once upon a time, I don't know if it's still true, opera singers in America had to go to Europe, in part because there was nowhere in America to get training and sing with a small company, right? Is that still true, or is that changing?
It's evolving.
Yes, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I think based off of conversations we've had together and our experience in the industry, there is very much a culture of arts in Europe that is lacking here in the States. So while there are numerous opera companies here in the States, both at the grassroots level and at the professional, larger level, there's just a lack of, what would you say?
There's a lack of viability for the career path if you were to just exclusively stay in the States, I think is what he's getting at. So we've talked a lot about the fact that there is a government subsidized industry for the arts. Government funded agencies are not private agencies that have to choose you. It's actually in some places it's a government agency that artists can just go to, and it's kind of like a career center. And so it's a very different format. And for example, my professor in grad school, one of my professors had like a 10+ year long career in Germany. And she worked for basically one opera house exclusively that entire time. And it was like a 9-to-5 job with benefits. And she was able to have after hours and maternity leave and have a family and stuff. And there's a lot of artists in the States that are stuck in kind of a perpetual gig economy. And as a result of that, the artists aren't able to thrive and make the kind of quality work that they want because they're working usually 3 to 4 jobs at one time, and the opera companies are having a hard time sustaining themselves too.
And I would say the very elite few that do manage to make a career of themselves, they barely have a home base. They're traveling constantly.
Yeah, you're in one state or the other, or most of your career is in Europe and you just happen to be based out of the States, and you'll do things with like the Met, but you won't it's really hard to exclusively live in the United States and have your career just be in this country if you're an opera singer and performance is all you do.
I'm sure a lot of opera singers do musicals as well because they're flexible enough to do that, right? I mean, once upon a time, musicals were actors that could barely sing, and now everyone on Broadway is extensively trained. There's nobody in that position anymore. So I'm sure there's people that go back and forth between those two worlds, right?
Oh, 100%. I'm a crossover artist. He's done a ton of both straight plays and musical theater. So we both are like living examples of that. But in addition to that, I don't think I've met one opera singer that is American or based in the United States that doesn't also do musical theater. And it's actually becoming more and more common for even Italian young artist programs to have a musical theater division or to have American Broadway kind of come over to Europe too. It's actually starting to get popular over there. My professor, the same one I mentioned earlier, did a production of West Side Story at the opera company that she worked for. Without opera, we wouldn't really have musical. And so if you think of it actually in reverse, that opera is just like another form of musical theater. It's the same kind of storytelling. It becomes a lot more, I think, accessible to people who are used to mainstream Broadway, but maybe haven't dipped into operatic works yet.
Which kind of brings us to that subject of, people are afraid of opera. They think it's elitist or stuffy or boring, and what people don't realize, they've been going to operas for 50 years if they've gone to musicals. I mean, really, as you said, it's the same form. Whether you have recitatives or dialogue, it's stories through music, right? It's the same thing. So let's talk about that for a minute. Why do you think people are afraid of opera? Why, even people who are music fans or theater fans or classical music fans, you mentioned opera and they fear in their eyes. So how can you dissuade them from being afraid of this art form?
There is a lot of truth, actually, to the idea that there's a lot of elitism in opera. I mean, even the history of the Met was formed because a group of stuffy rich people wanted to exclude another group of stuffy rich people. And unfortunately, here in the States, opera is steeped in elitism. And that's definitely a hurdle that we have to try and get past.
Yeah. Well, opera originated in its history with like being in courts or being among like the wealthy elite, and so they would have these big they were called opera serias, where you would have like these big dramatic multi-hour opera works that would be performed at palaces for guests of a king or a duke. But then as time went on, what's so interesting is we had like opera buffas, or like little comedic operas that happened as intermezzos between those long operas. Those became more accessible to the general public. And then opera evolved into the Romance era, where we have like Verismo and things like that, where all of a sudden we're not talking about Greek gods and goddesses anymore. We're talking about real people that went through really gritty, difficult experiences. And so while the industry, which I think what Tanis was getting at, while the industry behind the art form it can be extremely elitist, and that's another thing we kind of hope to push back on with our company. The art form itself has evolved to be actually very human and very like to the core of what our humanity needs to express through music. And a lot of people would go to operas, especially if they were of like a lower middle class, and they would actually use it as like an emotional catharsis, and they would be able to relate to those characters. Composers used it as a way to critique their governments without the risk of censorship. So Le Nozze di Figaro, which is one of the operas that we have featured in the concert, was all a critique on the governmental system. It was done in a way that was covert so that censorship would not get in the way, and they could still poke fun at the working class versus the wealthy elite relationship. And there's so much storytelling that like really deeply relates and resonates with us. Like Susanna and Figaro are servants, and they're the main characters in their story. And that was something that came about with kind of more with Mozart works toward the end of the classical era, but it's the only reason we have operas by Verdi and Puccini and things like that, because they did write about grand subjects, but they also wrote, their most popular works were about lower class or working class people. Like La Boheme, for example, is a big is a huge hit, and that was all about people who were struggling to get by, and inspired Rent, which I believe you guys did recently.
So let's talk a little bit about the program. How did you decide on the music that's going to be presented?
I wanted to do a combination of some stuff that may not be 100% standard repertoire. So we talked about, we definitely wanted to feature a female composer, because that's one of the hallmarks of what we want to do as a company, is a lot of underrepresented rep. But we wanted to also include a lot of standard repertoire that is maybe something that somebody who doesn't regularly go to opera has heard on Bugs Bunny or like Looney Tunes or or in Disney's I think it was Fantasia, featured a lot of like operatic melodies and stuff, or in a commercial, but they haven't heard the entire work, and they don't 100% know the story behind it. And I also think that we chose performers that were particularly expressive in their auditions and really heartfelt in their auditions, because we want to also display this as a super emotional art form, because the days of what we used to refer to in the industry as like the park and bark, it's more about the acting. And I'll kind of turn that over to you actually to elaborate on that, because you have the theater degree. So
yeah, absolutely. At its heart, opera is about communication, and with the advent of technology and the visual aspect becoming such a large part of how we experience art, it is very important to be able to communicate expressively with your body, with your face, not just with your voice. Even though in this day and age, I do believe it is the voice that is a little bit more hard to capture, because you'll get people that are very expressive, but their voices maybe just aren't there, or you don't really connect viscerally to the matter.
Yeah. And so we started our audition process actually doing a virtual blind audition process. So we did not see the performers, and we asked for no resumes and no headshots. So it was literally voice alone that we judged our auditions based off of. And then we had a second round where we saw videos so we could see what their acting choices were. But you can hear so much expressively just in the voice alone that we were already kind of pointing who was going to be the most animated on stage based off of that. And we chose a program that kind of catered to the performers we really liked from that process. And we also chose repertoire that I think would translate really well in telling that emotional story. These are some of the most dramatically interesting moments, I think, in these standard era works that we're doing. And then we have Francesca Caccini and we have Zarzuela on the program, which I think are two female composers, and Zarzuela are two very, very underrepresented entities in the opera world that are so, like, there's such a wealth of repertoire there that's so beautiful and rich that I'm so glad we get to represent that. I think there's like a balance that we hope to maintain with our company, where choosing people that are really appropriate for the role, but at the same time, through the virtual blind process, we still emphasized the voice enough that we were like, everybody gets kind of an even footing in the door, and it's just based off of how well they've cultivated their voice at first. We eliminate any possibility for like internalized bias or anything like that. And then in addition to that, you kind of have this balancing effect where you're also not emphasizing the looks too much. I do think that it's really beautiful that this is an art form that like it's accessible for every type of person. But I just think it's important to like strike that balance as a company. Like you don't want to go too far in one direction where it's completely like disjunctive to the audience. Like, why is this 50-year-old playing a 16-year-old? But at the same time, you do want to, these people can be like everyday people. They don't have to be supermodels, you know? So it's striking that kind of like in-between middle ground.
So where do you guys as an opera company want to be in 5 years, 10 years? Have you thought that far ahead? What's the long-term arc for Opera Cecilia?
I'm the queen of thinking too far ahead. In 5 years, I think we imagine the company being able to like really sustain a great balanced season of in-person performances and collaborations with ensembles, but still have a digital component. And I think I'll have you speak to the digital component a little bit more. Like we have a YouTube channel and a podcast series too that we're hoping to grow. And you can elaborate a little tiny bit more on that end, because you do most of the editing for that. So
yeah, I think to really thrive as a company, it's very important to remain diversified, both in the products that you're creating, in the individuals that are working within it. So ideally within 5 to 10 years, we're hoping this is our full-time job and we're able to provide opportunities for other artists and bring opera to different places that we either don't collaborate with in the States or they don't have access to it.
Yeah. In the more distant future, I would love to be able to offer an employment opportunity with benefits to some artists.
All right. Well, it's really exciting. I think you guys are doing a great job, and it's very cool to do what you're doing in this part of the world. So congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Before we're done, both of you guys, give me a 30-second elevator pitch. Nobody's ever heard of opera before. Nobody's aware of this stuff. What is the concert going to be?
Oh, no, I'm not the talker here.
I can start if you want. My little elevator pitch is that opera is a deep, heartfelt form of artistic communication. At the core of it, it's storytelling, and it is infinitely accessible and relatable when you know what it's about. And it's also an extremely deep and beautiful experience of a lot of the cultural roots that this country has. And a lot of areas were originated from like European colonies coming over and things like that. And so it's a deep, opera can be just as much as a melting pot as we would like to imagine our country to be. And I think when you understand that diversity really deeply, opera becomes a lot more accessible, and it's so much fun. There's really funny stuff on this program too. Like you're gonna have a wide spectrum of emotions, from being sad for some characters and then really laughing with others. So come have a good time.
There's a lot that opera has to offer, and all we're asking for is an opportunity to
come cry, come be angry at certain characters, being mean. I don't know. It's going to be a little bit of everything.
But feels are guaranteed.
Yeah, yes. For sure. And a lot of, I think, like more immersion and interaction than you would realize, because we have such deeply emotional performers.
All right. Well, Don't Fear the Diva, a tour of opera through the ages, will be April 1st at 7 p.m. and April 2nd at 2 p.m. at the Wyse Middle School Performing Arts Center. And tickets are available at gorgeorchestra.org. Tanise and Taylor, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us.
We're really excited. We're looking forward to the programs.
So are we.